Yeah, Rose Hilmo is a PhD candidate in the School of Oceanography. She worked with data scientist Joseph Hellerstein from the eScience Institute during the Incubator. And today she's going to be talking about developing tools to study baleen whale populations using large ocean bottom seismometer arrays. Thanks, Rose. You probably could have said that better than I did. That was embarrassing for an oceanographer.
Hi. Well, thanks everybody for showing up. This is a new experience for me giving a presentation over Zoom, so this will be interesting and fun. So first, I'd like to start out by introducing everyone to my data set. The data set that I use for my research is the Cascadia Initiative array, and so that is an array of about 70 ocean bottom seismometers that was deployed off the coast of the Pacific Northwest for 4 years. And that array was put out to study the seismicity of the Cascadia margin and possibly image the plate. But a side effect or extra benefit that we get from that is that the sampling rate of an ocean bottom seismometer, which measures ground motion, can also measure whale calls. So both fin and blue whale calls have powerful enough calls to interact with the seafloor and to show up on these ocean bottom seismometer signals. And so because of that, we can use these signals to detect when whales are in the region and calling. And this scale of the array allows us to do that over a very large area, and an area that's pretty critical for some marine mammal populations, that margin area. So what do these signals look like? So for the blue whale has several different kinds of signals, but the signal that we are most interested in is the blue whale B call, which you can see on this spectrogram. And that B call is this downswept call that occurs over about 10 seconds, and it's very stereotypical. So the calls always look nearly the same with very little variation over time. And so because of that, you can be very sure what you're looking at, whether it is a blue whale B call or not. Fin whale calls are also fairly stereotypical, but they are definitely very different from blue whale calls. They're more impulsive, they only last 1 to 2 seconds, and it's a very steep downsweep of a call from higher frequency to low. So by looking at the time series data and converting it to spectrograms, like you see here, we can very easily pick visually when calls occur. But it would definitely be easier to automatically have a computer process that would detect them for us. And so over the past several years, that's what we've done. And that's what we want to improve and adapt during this incubator. So our science questions. How does whale call activity vary in time and space in the Northeast Pacific? And how does call variability relate to other parameters such as environmental conditions and anthropogenic noise? Now, these are big questions. These are like my PhD level questions. But for this specific incubator, we focus down on blue whale calls in particular, and we're gonna build from there. So to start out, we had all of this code that we built in MATLAB. And MATLAB is a really great programming language, but it has some limitations, namely that it costs a lot to use and that it's not very widely used outside of academia and engineering. And so what we wanted to do was build this detector in Python for the data science incubator. And the motivation for that is to make it more open source and usable by other people. So here you can just see our original MATLAB code detecting these blue whale B calls on the spectrogram. And this blue figure is the kernel, which is what we use for our detector, which is a two-dimensional array of values that, when you cross-correlate with a spectrogram, gives you peaks where the signal shape matches. And that's how we detect blue whale calls. This is one of our goals of using those calls, is to locate where the whale was when it called, because they can propagate hundreds of kilometers, and we can get a triangulation from getting detections on multiple stations. But this is not the focus of what we were doing here. So this is just like a fun side note and a progression potentially of our code in the future to move to Python. So why do we want to make our method more accessible? Well, because there's a lot of work that can be done and a lot of information we can get that we just don't have the time to do it all. So you can see here the Cascadia Initiative array labeled on this world map, but you can also see these blue dots are other large seismic arrays that have sampling rates high enough to detect blue and fin whale calls. And this range of deployments can characterize blue and fin whale calls over this whole area. And blue and fin whales are really worldwide species. They are found in almost every ocean basin besides the Arctic. And so to really understand these sparsely populated populations, which are hard to observe visually, using these large ocean bottom seismometer arrays that have already been deployed is really just like free data to use to better characterize where whales are calling in the ocean. So what did we want to do in the incubator? We wanted to build a relational database of whale data. And to start with, we were detecting blue whale calls and putting them into this relational database. We intend to expand that database to include a lot of other data as well. But for the purposes of this incubator, we're really building that framework. We also wanted to move our whale detection code to Python. And we wanted to streamline and document the workflow so it'd be easy for somebody unfamiliar with it to learn it. And finally, we wanted to put all of this in a GitHub repository so it'd be publicly accessible and easy to get to. So step one, Python. Previously in MATLAB, to look at all these waveforms and detect whale calls, we were downloading years and years of seismic data and storing it locally in folders on hard drives, and then reading those files every time we wanted to process the data. Now, the issue with that is that that's about 2 terabytes of data. That's not a huge amount, but also not a small amount. And things like possibly losing the hard drives are things that can occur to that raw data. So one of the main motivators for us moving to Python is this package called obspy. And obspy can get seismic data from IRIS, where it is all stored, with a few simple commands, which you can see here in the middle. And just with a few simple commands, you can get that data, and then you can plot it, and you can analyze it, and then after that, you can just throw it away, because you can get it again later if you'd like. And this is a really great way to very easily get the data and make this code still fairly fast, even with downloading the data. Come on. Okay, there we go. All right. So step 2, this was really Joe's area of expertise, where he really helped build this whole thing and helped introduce me to the concept of a relational database. And so we used the SQL language, but we used SQLite, which is a nice attachment to Python. And we designed and brainstormed this database design. And what's important with this database is that you can relate a station and its locations with the calls that were detected by that station. And then further, when we use those calls to do localizations of whale calls, as I introduced previously, we also want to be able to associate those locations with the calls and the channels. And so previously in MATLAB, we were storing all of these files, detections, station information, localizations, all in different places in different formats. And every time we wanted to use it, we would have to run it through a code that would special process it and put it all together so it would match up. But with this relational database, it makes our data storage and workflow more efficient to have everything together and easy to access. And it's more understandable and usable by other scientists who may want to either use our data that we produce in the future or potentially add on to this database if they apply our methods to another array. And then finally, Joe really introduced me to GitHub and learning how to manage version control and make sure that a build is working in GitHub and making this database and code public. And that's really motivated, once again, by wanting to make this open source so other people can use it and easy to apply to our data. So what did we do? Well, we translated that blue whale detection code of B calls into Python. And so here is my result of my Python detection code. And on the bottom, you can see a spectrogram. And you can see two different types of those blue whale calls on the spectrogram. The call that comes in the front of a 2-beat series is that A call, which is the one that we are not as interested in. But then you can see this downswept call that lasts about 10 seconds, that's slightly higher pitched, and that is the B call. And you can see on this upper plot, this detection score series, which is the product of our cross correlator, that produces these larger spikes when below it you see a B call. And so this detection score, we then analyze searching for peaks and then storing the properties of those peaks in the database. So what does our database look like? So this is just some screens captures of the database browser for SQLite, just showing some of our database structure and data. And so this can be filtered and you can search for specific things in this browser and export them if you'd like, but it is very easy to access this through Python and just get the data that you want using the command line. And so this really streamlines the efficiency of storing and using our data. And so for our initial results, I detected over 100,000 calls over 60 stations for a full year of data. So from late fall to summer. And so I went through those and I just wanted to look at the quality of my detector. And so for each call, I would look at it and decide whether it was a true detection or a false trigger. And in that same time period, I would also look to see if there were any calls that I missed. And so you can see that these detections are all fairly accurate. This first figure here shows the prominence of the detection versus the number of detections in a bin. And so once you get above about 0.6, you've got over a 98% accuracy of that detector, that it will almost always pick a call that is true rather than a false trigger. And so that's good if you're looking for presence on a station during an hour. If you're looking just for whale presence over a year in a given time period, this is a great way to do it. But if you look at the next figure, this other bar chart here, it shows that I missed a lot of calls. I did not have many false calls, but I did miss a lot of faint ones. This is not very useful for localization methods. And so on this triangulation localization method, where you need multiple recordings of the same call at least 4 stations, that's 100 kilometers away. Sometimes you get really faint calls. And so if you're missing quiet calls, you're not going to be able to localize that call. And so what this has told me is that if I want to use this detector to localize calls, I'm going to have to lower my peak threshold. I'm going to have to be able to look at calls that are quieter than the ones I was detecting. But that's easy to do, and it's just a matter of rerunning the code with lower thresholds. And the great thing about the database is that then I can just filter out lower calls if I want, or I can include them all. So what am I going to do next? So continuing work in the same line, I also need to apply our detection method for fin whales. And so that's a matter of just building a new detection kernel and running it through my same code that we just wrote. Continue to fill in the database. We have blue whale calls, but we need to finish all 4 years. Also doing fin whale detections once I develop that kernel, and filling in the localizations of blue whale calls. I'm also going to try to continue to develop these new processes in Python rather than MATLAB, and potentially even convert some of my other codes, such as my localization codes, to Python as well. And so my long-term goals, scientifically, are to compare populations of whales with other parameters, such as environmental conditions and human activity. I also would like to apply these methods to other large OBS arrays, or at least inspire other people to do so. And I also want to work on some single station methods of whale location, which I didn't get into here because didn't want to overly lengthen the talk, but if you guys are interested in them, I can talk about later. So thank you for listening. And does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Rose. Right, so questions.
I can hop in with one while we're waiting for the other folks to jump in. Rose, I was wondering if there's any ability, so you mentioned the number of calls, I think it was 100,000 calls over a year. Is there any ability or distinction between different, like an individual's whale's call, so that you could figure out how many whales that actually represented?
Yeah, actually that would be really great. And for whales like humpback whales, you can do that. Whales that have variable songs. But for the blue whales, they really just have that stereotypical B call. And that's like it's thought to be like a mating song by males. So it's always very similar. So you can't really tell whether there's more than one whale in the area unless you manage to locate them in different places.
Gotcha, that makes sense.
Interesting. Valentina.
I have a question about the point you kind of made toward the end about that sometimes you have to change the threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And you may have to rerun the code. I was wondering, do you store some of the properties of that peak so that you don't have to rerun the whole thing again in the database?
Right. So my problem is that I ran it with that peak threshold too high to begin with. And so all of the detections I got are stored, but I didn't get any data from quieter calls that I missed. And so I can run it with a very low threshold next time, and then just filter the database with higher thresholds if I want more accurate results. And that's my plan, is to run it with a very low threshold, get all of these peaks, and then just filter through them based on what I need the data for.
Okay, I have a follow-up question then. So if you run it with the lower threshold, then you'll get more, but then maybe you want to store the shape of that peak. Did you consider that in the kind of when you're designing the database, or that was too complex to?
I store some. Are you asking like the features that I store?
Yeah, so basically so that you can tweak even more once you get those possible detection, you can tweak more just on those, the thresholds.
Mm-hmm. So I store those thresholds. I also store some other things, like the width of the detection, the start time, end time, peak time. I'm also storing the signal to noise ratio of like the noise within the call compared to the noise in that band, the median noise over half an hour. And so I have, 5 or 6 very diagnostic features that I can then look at later and filter through to make sure I'm getting the best subset of those.
Okay, thank you, that makes sense.
Last chance for questions for Rose. Shima?
Hello, thank you, Rose. That was a great presentation.
Thanks.
I don't know if you have done localization yet or not, but I was wondering how far from each hydrophone you can detect whale calls.
Can I get back to, yeah, okay. Yes, so we've actually put a lot of work into our localization method in MATLAB. And so I didn't really get to talk about this because I wanted to make sure I kept my talk shorter. But you can look at these nice colorful tracks. So you can see kind of the directionality of where a whale is going, because each dot is a localization of a single call. And the color scale goes from blue, which is early in this 24-hour period, to red, which is at the end of the 24-hour period. And so each one of these calls was detected at least 4 of these black stations, black squares, and then localized with at least 4 detections. And these stations are 75 kilometers apart at some locations. And so in order to be detected on at least 4 stations, that call has to travel around 100 kilometers. And so we know that it propagates at least that far.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Well, we're at time today. And so I want to thank our speakers again today, Rose and April. That was fantastic. I also want to thank all of the incubator participants. I know that a lot of our data scientists and research scientists are here to watch these presentations, and I know it's a tremendous amount of effort to do the incubator. But I think when seeing talks like this, it really impresses just how awesome the incubator program is. And I want to thank Dr. Stone for doing the intros and helping me put together these presentations.
Yeah,
and with that, I think, yes,
I was just
please.
going to say one word, which is that, if you watch these presentations and thought that your research might benefit from this type of collaboration, look for the call for proposals for the incubator program that goes out, typically goes out in November. Then the actual incubator takes place during winter quarter. And this is available to graduate students, postdocs, researchers, faculty to participate in this program. And it's across any field, any type of research question that involves a data science related challenge. So keep it in mind. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me, Sarah Stone, or to David Beck.